Hey there, this is Hannah, Chief Rebel at DeSkills. Imagine your high schooler could learn to harness artificial intelligence to solve real world problems for small businesses and nonprofits. Imagine they could get paid doing these impact projects on the weekends or summer break. And imagine that as a result, they could leave high school with more experience and connections than most college graduates. That's DeSkills. Learn more at skills.io. That's dskills.io.
This podcast is funded by Ted Dintersmith, the executive producer of the acclaimed film Most Likely to Succeed, and the author of the best-selling book What School Could Be.
Hey everyone, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast. I'm your host, Josh Rapoon. Before we start the show, please check out all the resources at whatschoolcouldbe.org and our global online community. If you are a committed education change agent ready to roll up your sleeves and reimagine teaching and learning, simply install the What School Could Be app on your mobile device or navigate to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org. I hope to see you there. Today I have two guests, and this episode is largely focused on the What School Could Be 2 Revolutions Master's Program in Learner-Centered Schools and Systems, which is geared towards innovative educators seeking to develop capacity as teacher leaders, instructional coaches, and supportive leaders working towards educational transformation. My guests are 2 Revolutions Senior Consultant Catherine Thorn and Waialae Elementary Public Charter School Curriculum Coordinator and Instructional Coach Kim Asun, who will graduate from the aforementioned Master's Program in July of 2024, a few weeks after this episode airs. Catherine Thorn has nearly 20 years of classroom and educational leadership experience. She holds a BA in biology from Boston University and a master's from the University of Massachusetts. She completed the Certificate of Advanced Graduate Studies in Leading and Learning in a Competency-Based System at Southern New Hampshire University. This program was a product of a collaboration between Southern New Hampshire and 2 Revolutions. Over the course of 20 years, Catherine has held numerous positions as a classroom educator and an educational leader and change agent in Massachusetts, Maine, and New Hampshire. Now a coach for 2 Revolutions, Catherine has co-facilitated state-level professional learning communities focused on leveraging performance assessment as evidence of graduation readiness and served as an adjunct professor for Spalding University. Catherine is leveraging her passions and experiences in implementing competency-based, student-centered learning to support 2 Revolutions graduate programs and communities of practice. The best way for me to introduce Kim Asun is to read from a letter of recommendation written on her behalf by Mary Wenstrom, the CEO of the school she works at, which is Waialae Elementary Public Charter School. Mary wrote, quote, "She has been an educator for 34 years and has been willing to learn, unlearn, and relearn. She possesses a genuine warmth and empathy that allows her to connect with educators at all levels, from veteran teachers to those just starting their careers. Kim doesn't simply connect, she leads. She exhibits a unique blend of empathy and knowledge. She can readily understand a teacher's challenges and frustrations, yet she also possesses the pedagogical expertise to offer insightful solutions. This makes her coaching sessions incredibly valuable, as teachers feel both heard and supported in their journey towards growth. She has a talent for building capacity within her colleagues, empowering them to become more effective educators," end quote. One of Kim's students' parents once wrote, quote, "You are a real person in a world where real people are hard to find. And when my son needed you, when I needed someone, even though I tried so hard not to need anyone, you were there. You were my friend when I needed a real one," end quote. Beautiful and high praise. which is why I'm glad to have Kim on this show. Prior to her position at Waialae Elementary Public Charter School, Kim taught for more than 23 years at Ben Parker Elementary and Hawaii Technology Academy. She is also active in several organizations working to prepare kids for the workforce of today and tomorrow, including the Pilina Education Alliance. And now, listeners, here's my conversation with Catherine Thorn and Kim Asun. Catherine and Kim, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be joining you this morning.
Thank you so much, Josh. I'm excited to be here. Nervous and excited, but it's bringing joy.
No worries. This will be great, Kim. So, Kim, I'm going to start with you. You shared with me some wonderful and moving reflections on your life growing up in Hawaii on the windward side of Oahu. And reading your words, I marveled at your resilience as you navigated life and loss and the challenge of having a father who was the longtime principal at the elementary school that you attended. And you also shared that you struggled with academics, that you hated middle and high school, and that sports became your passion and, I suspect, your most intense learning experiences. So let's focus on flag football, which you called your most epic moment. So, Kim, what is that story of becoming a quarterback and a running back on a flag football team? And in what ways do you carry those memories with you in your day in and day out as an educator?
Thank you so much for that question. I have been an avid athlete my whole life. I think not being a good academic person or seeing myself not as a good academic person in school, sports was the way that I felt the most confident, and I felt like I could do anything. Everything was possible. And being back in the 1970s, girls' sports wasn't something that was out there. And I just wanted to play football so bad, but it wasn't considered a sport that a girl plays. I don't think there were any ways that you could even join a boys' team as you could now. And so I remember just begging my dad, like, please just let me play football. And he's like, there's no way you can do it. And that's not for girls. And so I had a person that was part of the Parks and Recreation at Pu'ahala School. And he saw the gift in me as being an athlete. And he says, hey, we have this flag football team for girls. Would you like to join? And I was like, yes, I just love to join, but you have to convince my dad because I know for sure he's not going to let me do it. So he did speak on my behalf. He promised him that he would take me to the practice and he would do everything. My dad didn't have to do anything, but just allow me to be there. And having that opportunity meant the world to me, that I was actually finally being able to be noticed for what I was good at. And so being the quarterback and, after watching footballs every morning, I just loved that I was a part of that. And I think that helped me know that it was okay being a girl that wanted to play sports that was unheard of back then. And so I think that knowing that I could actually perform in something that I knew I could excel at made me feel so empowered as a woman and as a person.
Do you remember feeling accepted right away by your teammates when you came into that? Because that was a while back, and that's a pretty unusual situation. Do you remember that?
I do. And it was nice to see that there were other girls. And, I was considered a tomboy back then. And to know that there were other girls just like me having the same passion for football. And I think like knowing that we all had a collective responsibility to be a team in order to move forward. And it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about being able to do something that most people would never have the opportunity to do any other way.
That's awesome. Do you remember the first time that you actually went into a game as either a quarterback or a running back? And do you remember what that felt like? That must have been crazy.
Yeah. Just to be able to hold a football and know that I wasn't playing on the streets against boys.
Yeah.
But being able to own it and throwing the touchdown pass or running the touchdown, that was like the epic feel of seeing it on TV, but I actually got to experience it.
Yeah. I know the feeling. Well, I played football for many years, and I remember the first time I got into a game, that was just a crazy, crazy moment. So that's awesome, Kim. So, Catherine, time constraints forced me to skip over your early years growing up in New Hampshire, your all-girls Catholic school experiences, your passion for dancing and ballet and tap and jazz, and learning how to balance the essential elements of a developing life and learning how to learn. So let's jump to a pivotal moment listeners need to understand to know Catherine Thorn. So during your senior year at Boston University, you were an undergrad teaching assistant, and something remarkable happened related to review sessions for exams. What is that story, Catherine, and what are the realizations you gained that changed how you thought about learning?
That was such a pivotal moment in my entire history. So,
Hmm.
senior year, Boston University, I was headed to med school and I became an undergraduate teaching assistant for a psychology course. And what that meant was that I attended classes, I took notes, and I supported other learners who were in the course by running review sessions ahead of tests.
Hmm.
So, the first test came and maybe 50 people showed up, and the professor reported back scores afterwards, and they noticed a statistical difference in the data for
Mm-hmm.
those who had attended the review session and those who hadn't. And they shared that to just sort of let people know in the course that, hey, these review sessions are valuable for you. So the second one, 100 folks showed up out of a
Mm.
class of approximately 200. And again, they shared back the data. And in time for the third one, we had to find a bigger room for that review session than what we had booked because I had so many folks attending.
Yeah.
It came time for the final exam, and that review session was, there was, never mind standing room only. People were just piled on the floor and, wherever we could fit. I'm sure we were probably, we probably had violated some fire codes by how many people we'd stuffed into that room.
Right.
And at the end, the scores in that particular section were so much higher
Mm.
than the other sections. And they had to do an investigation essentially to see whether or not there was a chance that I had gained access to the final exam because the scores were so much higher.
Yeah.
And it was, it came out that there was no way because they hadn't even finalized it by the time that I had run the review. The review session was several days before and all of that. And so I don't remember if it was the dean or the associate dean, but it was definitely, the department head for the psychology department kind of said to me, I'm not sure what your plans are for the future, but you're supposed to be an educator.
Amazing.
And if you haven't heard about it, there's this program. And that conversation is what started me on my path to being a lifelong educator. So I was 22 years old with my applications into med school and very clearly headed in that direction and did an about face.
Wow.
And it was 100% the right choice for me.
Yeah.
And I am thankful for that opportunity and for that moment.
Wow, what an intuitive thing. It's like, if we do review sessions, test scores will go up, but of course the reaction is something must be wrong. She must have gained access to the test. It's so crazy. That's such a great story, Catherine. So I'm going to ask a follow-up, skipping forward a bit more during the time after your first years as a classroom teacher. During your second pregnancy, you had to have 2 operations to remove a tumor on your brain. And as a result, long story short, you did a deep dive into learning what it means to learn in an incredibly real world context. So what is that story? Like, what does it mean to you when educators talk about the messiness of learning, which you experienced in a very, very real way?
Yeah. So let's see. I was 27. I had my second one was 6 weeks old, and I had just come home from the hospital. So my older one was 3. And I came home from the hospital, as you said, from second brain surgery. And I was not able to sign my own discharge papers. I could no longer write my name.
Wow.
So I'm there with 2 children. My husband was military. I was fortunate enough that he was able to stay with me for a while, but not not all the time. And so I would take my youngest in for vaccines and I couldn't sign my name, right?
Yeah.
And dial a phone. So I often needed some help. And my 3-year-old needed to learn to write his name.
Mm.
The interesting thing was that I could talk somebody through calculus problems, right? I still deeply understood genetics. I could still
Yeah.
provide tutoring around organic chemistry, but I couldn't write my name.
Mm.
It was a really interesting place to be. And so I sat at that kitchen table with all of the fun tools that are meant for kiddos to learn to write their letters. And my 3-year-old and I learned side by side how to do that again. Again, for me, for him, for the first time. But that experience of having such a disconnect between what I know I could do, what I know I can do, and the things that were just simply needed some time or a different way of working through, I think it really gave me a deeper level of understanding for any kiddo or any human who is trying to demonstrate their learning through ways that are just simply not working for them.
Yeah.
And understanding that and experiencing that there are so many different ways of demonstrating what you know and can do,
Mm.
and being really tuned into what are those other options? What are those other ways? How can we meet you where you are? And how can we provide a different pathway for individuals?
Mm.
And so it definitely made me a better educator, pushing forward to time in classrooms where I would have students with IEPs and I would run headlong into reports that would talk about where students struggled. And I would constantly be looking for, but where are their strengths?
Yeah.
Where are the places where they shine and they thrive? Because if I can tap into those, that can create that detour or that new pathway to getting them to where I need them to be in a way that is working for them. So it's just rethinking how we ask learners to learn and how we ask learners to demonstrate their learning.
That's awesome. And Catherine, what was emerging for me as I was preparing for today's conversation for both you and Kim was just this, your life experiences so clearly, were developing in the two of you a real deep sense of empathy and of understanding what other people's experiences are and what it meant to walk in their shoes. And, I love that story. So Kim, I'm going to come back to you. You shared that your journey to becoming a teacher was along a very long and winding road, which included waypoints like hotel work and aerobics instruction, summer fun leadership, and sports coaching. And these waypoints helped you figure out what you did not want to do. Ultimately, two things happened. You got your BA in elementary education, and you discovered your mission, which was to help kids who struggle in school to find purpose and interest and even a passion, and dare say, kids who maybe, had something like what Catherine described as, some sort of an issue that they were trying to work through in terms of how they learn and what they learn. So what is that story, Kim, of you taking your experiences as a student and turning them into, as an educator, your philosophy of education and your approach to kids in your classrooms?
Yeah, being from a history and lineage of educators in my family, from my dad being a principal to all his siblings being something to do with education, teaching, administration. Growing up, I said, that's what I will never do because I saw the stress that it caused, especially my dad being a single dad raising us at the time. I was like, I'm not sure, and I'm not good at school. But every experience along the way, from working at fast food and working at a hotel while going to school, teaching aerobics, coaching, doing the summer fun, I always came back to being with people and building relationships. And that was a part of me that is just who I am. I love learning people's stories. I love learning about people and how they work. And so when I finally had to decide what I was going to do after my summer fun experience, I'm like, I love kids. Like, that is something that I just love kids. I love the spontaneity. I love them just being who they are and being accepted for that. And I think that is something that I always keep with me because, I was that student that wasn't good in school, but I knew I had other strengths and other value that I could bring to the table. I just was never asked. I was just never given the opportunity to do it except for sports. That's the only place I felt like could shine. So I feel like as I became an educator, I knew that if I could build relationships with children, especially children who did not feel like they fit in,
Right.
that I could teach them something. I could make them at least feel valued. And I know once you can build that relationship with children or even a child, like they're going to learn from you because they trust you, and you can start building that sense of community. Like we're all in this together. We all bring strengths. We all bring our differences, but collectively we can all work towards one goal.
Kim, my experiences in school, like yours, were terrible. I have very few positive memories, most especially of middle and high school. But the educators who made me, and they're I can count them on one hand, who made me feel like included, like I was valued, that I had something to contribute, they were the ones that really stood out like shining stars in my life. And several of them actually remained friends all the way through my life. And I just marvel at your insight about this, and it would be fair to say, right, Kim, that was something that you were realizing even as you stepped into teaching, is that you were going to play that role in kids' lives, that you understood them, you heard them, you wanted to work with them, that you were developing a relationship with them. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Yes, totally. I mean, I think even for me, building relationships with families and parents was another key component. Because if I could let them see and know by my actions and by my words that I care about your children, when with my own kids, we were out playing football, they were playing sports with these kids that I was teaching. They were at my house after school. I was helping them with their homework. So just to see that I had a passion and I had a desire to want to do whatever it took to, raise this kind of like it takes a village to raise a child. That was my attitude towards teaching.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, Catherine, we have both seen and been influenced by Ted Dintersmith's film, Most Likely to Succeed. And you shared with me a reflection on a specific scene in the film where a math teacher asks high school kids to make a choice between education as a process of succeeding on tests versus education as a process of succeeding and thriving in life. And the students all choose success on the test. And the poor math teacher sort of bangs his head on the desk in front of him. And so as a classroom teacher, you wanted your students to see themselves as more than a GPA, and you acted on that desire. So what is that story? Like, what is the strategy, Catherine, you used, and how did you win your students over to seeing education as being more than just a grade or a GPA or a score on a test?
I often used to tell parents and students when they came into my classroom for open house, I'm not a science teacher. I'm your child's teacher, right? I happen to teach skills through science, but those larger skills that they're going to take with them, regardless of where they're going, regardless of where they end up, and through all 17 changes in life that they don't anticipate now, but they likely will go through, those skills that are going to serve them in all of those ways is really what I'm focused on growing. I mean, convincing 14-year-olds can be challenging. So I would start the year by asking them, to name 3 to 5 pathways that they feel like they could possibly see themselves in, and to list some skills that they think that would, set them up for success. And we brainstorm through some of them so they had something to pull from. And genetics and nuclear fusion typically weren't on the list, even though I was a science teacher and would have wanted those there.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But other skills surfaced instead. And so they started to co-own that struggle between content is important because that's what's going to get me into colleges, and that's what's going to prepare me for exams, and that's what's going to allow me to, to go through that pathway that they have been envisioning as normal for high school and setting them up for their future. But now they've sort of opened their eyes and their concept to there are other skills that are equally valuable and that they should be growing those as well and practicing those. And so I would start by offering them the choice in assessments or demonstrations of learning. They could choose a traditional assessment. Absolutely. Show me what you know and can do. Fantastic. I'm glad you rocked that. And would you like to also engage in this other opportunity where we're taking those content skills, but we're integrating those other skills more deeply and either co-designing that assessment, or even if I designed it, there was an element of, impact on the community was woven in, or learning from the community, learning from somebody other than just what was happening in the classroom, and then demonstrating their learning through a different type of assessment. Some students opted to do both because it made them feel like they were not giving up one thing over the other until they became more comfortable with it. And then you had those few who would look at it as, I don't have to do that traditional assessment. I get to do this other thing. I'm going that direction. And slowly but surely, more and more of my students would let go of that need for that traditional, I've always been an A student. This is how I'm an A student. I can do the traditional tests as their measure of success, and instead shifted over to this thing that feels uncomfortable and is new and is different. And I struggled through it and it wasn't easy and there wasn't an answer in the back of the book. And my product doesn't look anything like anybody else's product, but it's my product and I'm proud of it. And I, as a learner, can see where I've demonstrated my content skills, but I'm also seeing where I'm refining and growing those other skills. And that's what I get to do in this class. That's what I get to do in my learning. And that became exciting for them. And over time, those learners are now the ones who are advocating for similar experiences in other places and in other ways. And that to me is the win. They're advocating for themselves as learners, and they're seeing themselves as more than just a grade or a number. They're seeing themselves for the depth and breadth of what they know and what they can do in the impact that they can have on themselves, one another, and their community.
Yeah. Wow, that's marvelous. There's always a moment, Catherine, in every episode or every interview where I feel like I want to go back to school, and that just happened. Everything that you were describing there just makes me want to go back and go back through my school experience again, because I really feel like I missed. And so, Kim, you also saw Most Likely to Succeed and were moved by it. And I think it goes without saying, now that I know so much more about the deep empathy that is part of your core DNA, that it makes sense you saw Most Likely to Succeed through the stories of three of its protagonists. So there's Scout, the little girl in tears at the start of the film. There's Samantha, the young high school theater director, and Brian, the big ideas dreamer whose project is not ready in time for a public exhibition. So let's take these one at a time, and I'll have you briefly reflect on each protagonist. So let's start with, why were you so heartbroken for Scout, the little girl in tears at the beginning of the film?
That just broke my heart. Just to see that she was unable to advocate for herself, like Catherine was saying, and the mom did all the talking, but no one was listening to what she needed. And I think that's what broke my heart, is that she was unable to express how she really felt about why she wasn't doing well in school.
Yeah, that was my feeling as well. She just sat there and took it all in, and you really had no way of knowing what was going through her brain other than the tears that were coming, or streaming down her face. So what is inspiring, Kim, about Samantha's story of becoming that particular theater production's director?
What inspired me most was her confidence that she built. Like, she was this shy, reticent girl who her mom wasn't sure that that was the place for her to be. And she was out to prove herself that I can do something. And to see how much she grew in the process of taking the leadership of producing this wonderful play, it was just nice to see that she did all those global competency skills that we don't even measure.
Yeah.
But what a way, how could we measure that?
Yeah. And at the same time, thinking back to what Catherine said a minute ago, it was sort of a process. Her confidence growing, in my mind, was like a co-production, or it was co-creation between Samantha and her teachers, right? You could see it happening on screen. It wasn't just a one-way thing.
Yes, totally. That was beautiful.
It was beautiful. Okay, and so the last one before we go to break. So, Kim, Brian's story is one of heroism, learning from failure and ultimately succeeding. Or, and this is the provocation here, is it a case study in failed team leadership? Or something in between? Like, what's your assessment of the way that Brian was portrayed in the end?
You know what, Brian, the teacher who just commended him on being visionary and didn't want him to stop being Brian. Like, how powerful is that statement to say, stop being you? But in that growth process, he was able to figure out hey, maybe I was being a little bit too visionary and I wasn't listening to my teammates, and here were the consequences of it. But it didn't mean that he failed. It just meant that there was something for him to learn about himself. And I think that's the beauty of it, is embracing who you are and being able to accept the feedback. And I think had he not failed, or what we considered failed, he would have never learned those lessons. You could have never taught that. Never.
Right.
That had to happen in the moment.
Right. That's awesome, Kim. I got a chance to talk to Brian just a couple of years ago, and he was just finishing up college, and he was actually in film production, of course, right? It's made so much sense that he was in something that required a lot of people to collaborate together, and he was succeeding beautifully. So that's great. So, hey, everyone, we have been talking to Catherine Thorn and Kim Asun. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Do you believe there's a better way for individuals to learn and fulfill their human potential than in traditional schools? If so, then join me on my 2 podcasts, The Future of Education and Future You, where we explore these issues and more. My name is Michael Horn, and I've been working to build a better future for all individuals for over 15 years. I'm the co-author of multiple books on the future of learning, including my latest, From Reopen to Reinvent. And you can also stay up to date with all my writing through my Substack newsletter, The Future of Education. Join me as we create the future of learning together.
What does the future of learning look like? All the big changes going on in tech and society these days are raising tough and fascinating questions about education and where it's going. We dig into those questions every week on the EdSurge podcast. I'm Jeff Young, an editor and a reporter at EdSurge, and I sit down with educators, students, and scholars for frank and in-depth conversations about how education is changing. You can find the EdSurge podcast wherever you listen, or just go to edsurge.com and click on the podcast link. I hope you'll check it out.
Hi, I'm Ricardo.
I'm Mary. And I'm Liz.
And we co-host Course Stories, a podcast produced by the Instructional Design and New Media team at Arizona State University.
In this podcast, we tell an array of course design stories alongside other ASU online designers and faculty.
Join us as we talk to the course design experts about shaping the future of online education. Tune into Course Stories, where innovation meets instruction.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.
Course Stories!
Perfection.
Hey everyone, we are back with 2 Revolutions, Catherine Thorn and Wailea Elementary Public Charter School's Kim Asun. So Catherine, you shared a slide deck with me, a 29-slide journey into your philosophy of education that is rich with metaphors, 3 in particular, which are educational practice as a puzzle to be solved, rather than a straight line between content mastery or content pouring information into kids' brains. And the second metaphor is trains that have left stations but are backed up to include those who feel like they've been left behind. And of course, boldly planting seeds in fertile soil. So because our time is limited, let's make the leap to your work at Two Revolutions and the Masters of Education in Learner-Centered Schools and Systems, which is a partnership with What School Could Be. So what is this master's program, Catherine, and in what ways do metaphors like puzzles and trains backing up and boldly planting seeds help our listeners understand this program?
Thanks for the setup there, Josh. I can't tell you how excited I am about this program. We describe it as designed by educators for educators. And I see that really as a promise. It's a promise that it is an experience that is going to set our educators up for success as leaders, as practitioners, as well as their students, right, as learners. And so it is designed in a way that is modeling the type of experience that we want educators to create. It's really hard to create something you've never seen or experienced. And so, walking through it as learner gives the educators who go through that program a place to sort of pause and reflect. How does this feel? How is this different? How is this unique? How do I have to be different as a learner? What do I need from my educators in order to be successful? And then taking those reflections and now flipping roles. And if I want my students to be successful, then what do I need to do differently as a learner? So there's that component. Meeting educators where they are is that metaphor you referred to of like backing the train up, right? In an experience that is modeling a competency-based approach. It's recognizing that every learner has their own unique entry point where they are already bringing experiences and expertise with them, and those should be valued. It's not a box to be checked, but it's evidence of where you are and where you need to go and where you can grow and how. So backing up to where you are, helping you go to where you need to go, is that really that learner-centered approach to learning, so that people are allowed to and encouraged to make choices along the way that make the learning authentic and relevant to each individual learner.
Yeah, the metaphor of the planting of seeds. And I think that's something that I've really latched onto over the last 10 years is this notion of, that you're in a co-creation process with the folks, with your learners of kind of enriching the soil to make it most organic, as organic and as rich as possible so that anything that gets planted in it really starts to grow.
Yeah. One of the design principles here for the program is such that educators going through are not handed a how-to manual.
Yeah.
Because no two schools are the same, no two communities are the same, no two classrooms are the same. And so the program doesn't just simply hand you a set of directions to follow. Instead, it's planting the seeds of what's possible, what is needed. Here are tools, and what can you imagine? What can you design? What is needed, but for your students in your community, and then giving educators the skills and the strategies and the experiences so that they can then engineer the school that their students need.
Wow. Again, one of those moments where, a few minutes ago, I wanted to go, because of what you were saying, go back to middle and high school. And now I want to go back to grad school because that wasn't a particularly great experience either. It was a lot of sitting and listening to people talk to me and then doing my own exploration. So thank you for that, Catherine. And so, Kim, I am sounding like a broken record, but again, in the interests of time, we have to skip over the fact that you're a huge fan of Brene Brown and Angela Duckworth and Carol Dweck. And I'm honored to say the What School Could Be podcast. I appreciate that. And we have to skip over your thoughts about an influential TED Talk about the myth of average and something a soccer team in Thailand did you think is a model of innovation. So instead, we must make the leap into becoming a member of the first cohort of the two revolutions, what school could be, Spalding University, Masters of Education and Learner-Centered Schools and Systems. So how did this happen, Kim? What drew you to getting this particular master's? And in what ways has the process of learning become both or been both challenging to you and also affirming to your approach to learning?
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a great question. So it's funny that you asked the question about how did I get to this master's program. To be very literal, I was at the Schools of the Future conference. It was the pre-day before, and they had brought up, here's this master's program. It's with HSTA. I was representing YLI as part of the learning leadership team. And I was like, I told myself that I would never get my master's until there's something that I'm truly passionate about. I'm not going to get my master's to get my master's. I'm going to do it because that's something that I really want to do. And I'm not afraid to say at age 57, almost, I could retire if I wanted. I was like, what am I thinking? Like, why do I want to get my master's now? And I really wanted to do something that I felt passionate about. And because our school at YLI has to do with our mission of being student-centered and whole child, I needed to learn more about what does that look like as an instructional coach? How am I going to be a leader in helping teachers figure out what does that look like at our school? And so that's the foremost reason why I went into it. I wanted to learn more. I knew there was something different about education that I wanted to be a part of. I just didn't know how to go about it.
Wow.
So I think what has amazed me the most is, I was an elementary director prior to this at another public charter school, and I did not have the knowledge nor the skills that I needed in order to lead, I think, in the best way possible. And our first class that we had was on leadership, and I was like, darn, if I would have known that before, I would have totally changed my approach to some of the things that I did. So I think just being able to just absorb more information. And again, like Catherine said, with the program, we are actually going through the process that we want our teachers to take our students through and be able to implement that and know what it feels like to navigate and get feedback and try to figure it out again. And that process of, I always say, of learning, unlearning, and relearning, that's something that I'm constantly doing every single day at my job. And I think that has been the biggest struggle for me, is being able to be okay with being messy and not having that final outcome and that linear way of thinking and what does this product look like in the end. It's really about the process. And that's what I've really taken from the program, is being okay to be uncomfortable.
So perfect segue, Kim, then to stepping into the moment when I would love to directly tie your participation in this master's program to your work at YLI Elementary Public Charter School. So at YLI, you were working on too many initiatives to count, it seems, including a restructuring of your leadership professional learning community, coaching and development of a culture of care, and refining your mission and vision, which is no small thing. So how specifically, Kim, has your work in this master's program helped you to move forward at YLI? And if it's possible, a couple of concrete examples would be terrific.
Yeah. So being at a public traditional school for 23 years, I've experienced the PLC process back in probably 2010. And it was kind of just thrown on our lap. And it was like, here, you guys are going to do this PLC. It was like a verb.
Yeah.
And, we went through the data dive and we learned what we could with what we had, but we didn't have the information we needed. But I knew that it was an important process of never, again, being in silos and thinking that you had to figure things out by yourself, that we could be a collective. Like, John Hattie's teacher collective efficacy has the highest rating of growth, right?
Yeah.
So how can we do that to better the student outcomes that we want. And so being at YLI, they had what they called articulation meetings, but I was trying to, from the lens, just being here, this is only my second year I completed, of trying to figure out how could we change the time that we have, which is twice a week, 90 minutes. So there's 180 minutes a week. How can we change those articulation meetings to get us more aligned with what our mission and vision is about at YLI? How can we make sure that we're being more student-centered? How can we make that our integrated thematic units have the performance assessments that are high quality? And I think, it's been a difficult process because I'm new here. So there's that side of it of not wanting to change everything so fast, or I should say, suggesting so much change. But how can we make use with the time that we have and restructure it? So this year we changed our articulation meetings, and now we call it PLCs, and we've structured it so that we're talking about our ELA and our math. We have our ITU time. We have instructional coaching, or what we call universal coaching as well. And they have their team time. So we've really tried to structure the process, get into our curriculum mapping, making sure that we know exactly what we're teaching. We have a high new amount of teachers coming into YLI. So this year, I think we had 14 new teachers. So that took a lot of time as an instructional coach, because of those 14, 7 were first year brand new teachers. So that was another roadblock that we had to, maybe not a roadblock, but an obstacle that we had to overcome. So besides, being a student-centered school, now you're trying to teach first-year teachers how to get into this integrated thematic units, which they may not have any experience behind, right? They're first-year teachers. So my role here is really supporting the administrators and their goals and their views of how we can be more mission and vision aligned, and how can we do that through the PLC process.
Wow. So, Kim, it's now happened again. Because of Catherine, I want to go back to middle and high school and do it again, and also go back to grad school and do it again. And now, because of you, I want to go back to teaching again. I would love to be teaching with you side by side. That is just fantastic. And it's a perfect segue, Catherine, back to you. An article posted at Two Revolutions site that you authored titled Rethinking Retakes. And in the article you wrote, and I'm going to quote, this is a lengthy quote here, "In a world where we desire to act upon the core belief that learning is the constant, time is the variable, and we embrace the messiness inherent within learning, educators must wrestle with rewriting long-standing traditions within the assessment arena." End quote. So let's tie your article and this quote to the master's program and to what Kim was just describing over the last few minutes. And so, Catherine, from your facilitator perspective, how does Two Revolutions approach developing leadership capacity that ultimately will make your quote manifest on a campus? And I hope this question makes sense. And also, let's note how much What School Could Be cares about assessments for deeper learning, and also the rethinking of the role of time in learning. So what are your thoughts?
So many, Josh. Questions. So many.
Not a small question. I know.
Yeah, not a small question at all. So there's a couple things that I'd like to just sort of start with. The first one is, at True Revolutions, we talk about leadership with a lowercase L as opposed to an uppercase L. Leadership is dispositional, not positional. So regardless of the role that you fill within your school or system, you can be and you likely are a leader. So that's the first thing. The second assumption that I enter this with is learning is messy, and it's often loud for anybody who's done it with students in the room. And it doesn't happen on a predictable path, right? All the time that we spend as educators developing those learning progressions and saying this particular skill is going to take this long to learn, and then I can run an assessment, that is for an average student, and there's no such thing as average, right? It's a myth. The average American family has 2.3 children. That doesn't exist. The average learner, the average student doesn't exist. And yet we build all of these rules and timelines and systems and structures around something that doesn't exist, the average. And so how do we help educational leaders, again, not a role, but leadership disposition. How do we help educational leaders rethink system structures, policy, practice, all the way down to conversations with individual students to allow for and celebrate that messiness and that unpredictable timing of learning?
Wow.
The way that we do it at Two Revolutions is we model it. Again, educators can't create something that they themselves haven't experienced. And it's really easy to say, my grading system won't allow it. That policy tells me I can't. That's not the way that it's done here. My PLC, we have to do things the same, right? And those are all valid and real. I'm not, saying that those are not, but those are not going to change unless we begin to question them and to have evidence that it could and should be different. And so that's really where this article came from, is helping educators to really rethink this idea of what are we assessing, when are we assessing, and when are we placing value on learning? And, when are we sort of marking it as, I now have this evidence and what do I do with it? And so helping educators going through this program to experience a process that is messy, that the timing is not the same for every person that goes through the program, and that their evidence of learning is based on their final products. There is no averaging in this program. It is completely based on the body of evidence, based on everything that you've produced. Where are you compellingly at against a learning expectation? And scores are given based on that. And experiencing that, having somebody go through who came in pretty far along and is able to refine, tweak, and adjust in one class, but then in the next class, those first few assignments are really messy, right? And they're challenging, and they have to go through several feedback loops and go through that place, as Kim had shared, of they was uncomfortable, right? You get some feedback. It's like, that's the first time I've had to get that and had to revise a few times. But being able to experience at the end what the journey was is what you reflect on, and it's what you take with you. But it's not negatively impacting where you got to in the end. Anybody who finishes a 5K race finished a 5K race, if that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And that's learning. Learning is how far have you gone, not how fast, and not where you were at the halfway point. It's where did you finish? And that's what we celebrate, and that's what we model in this program.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. Kim, before we go to our second break, I wasn't going to do this, but I have to come back to you just one more time. Catherine talked about learning is loud. And I wonder that you come on campus each day at Wiley Elementary Public Charter School, and that you think about the idea that the louder it is, the more learning is happening, the more engagement is happening. Is that a fair way of kind of looking at what happens when you come on campus?
That is a fair way of looking at it. I think classrooms, like I said, being, in a traditional school where you were quiet and you had to be sitting, that's what showed engagement, right? That they were listening to you. And so now to have that flip switch, 30 years later, that loud means good, that they are learning and they are sharing. I think at Wiley School, you're going to see that. You're going to see that outside when they're at Ina and they're, looking at their garden and learning about what they are doing and having those experiential learning opportunities. I think loud is good. And I think we have to reframe what the classroom should be looking like now and what it should sound like and what it should feel like. Those are very different than it was 30 years ago. So definitely at Wiley, I totally agree with Catherine. Loud is messy, but it is good.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, hey everyone, we've been talking to Catherine Thorn and Kim Asun. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there. Are you interested in hearing weekly conversations with authors, leaders, and practitioners at the forefront of learning and education innovation? Then you'll love the Getting Smart podcast. This podcast amplifies the incredible work being done by some of the most innovative minds in education. Learn new leadership styles, new technologies, new frameworks and mindsets, and get the fuel you need to stay motivated and curious. Together, we can empower all learners to thrive. It's available at gettingsmart.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, friends. This is Toy Hirschman from EntreEd. It is my great honor to uplift this excellent podcast, What School Could Be. As always, we are super excited to support innovation in education. We've been lucky enough to feature some of the incredible What School Could Be educators on our podcast. If you are looking to be inspired by entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial educators and other great minds from across the world, check out the EntreEd Talk podcast, and please like and subscribe and leave a review. Thanks for tuning in.
Are you ready to shake things up in the classroom? Then get ready to blast off into the future of education with the Teacher Nerds podcast. Join Joe DiPaolo and Ron Nober as they share their own experiences, as well as talk with guests who are experts and innovators in education. From engaging teaching techniques to the latest educational technology, this podcast is a must-listen for anyone passionate about the future of learning. Subscribe and get ready to learn with the Teacher Nerds podcast.
Hey everyone, we are back with Two Revolutions' Catherine Thorn and Wailea Elementary Public Charter School's Kim Asun. So Kim, back to you. I wondered if you had any big meta questions on your mind, the 10,000-foot kind. And it turns out you have what I think, Kim, is the most profoundly thoughtful 10,000-foot question ever posed by one of my episode guests. So very quickly, I want to get out of the way and let you run with it, but let me share this provocation. You observed that with humans living much longer lives, we are now in a situation where education leadership faces the struggle of working with at least 4 generations in the workplace. So why do you characterize this, Kim, as a struggle? And our listeners would really love to know your insights about what it's like to have all of those generations on campus and, in the context of working towards, a caring and connected community at Wailea Public Charter School.
Thank you so much for that question, Josh. I've been grappling with this for so long. And I think, again, as being a former administrator, this is probably one of the most impactful moments of my learning is that when I was going through some of the struggles, I realized that my boyfriend would always tell me, stop expecting people to have the same work ethic as you. This is a different generation. And I was just like, why would you say something like that? No, everybody needs to work hard like me. And he was like, this is not the same. You are not the same generation of all these people that are, above you and below you in age. And so we talk about the Gen Z, the millennials, the Generation X, the baby boomers, and we may even have some people who have come back from retirement and part of the silent generation, right?
Yeah.
So education is basically in a traditional form of the silent generation, right? Where it's very methodical, it's just very linear, right? You do as you're told to do. It's kind of like you're that good worker that will just tell me what to do and I'm going to go through and do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, and then people like the millennials, they were born in an age where technology has started. So they think differently. They work differently. Working remote is, something normal for them. And then you keep going on to these different generations, and it makes it really difficult at times to be empathetic of each other and to understand each other and how that all with that, like I said, that teacher efficacy, how can we collectively work together when we think differently, when we were raised differently in a different generation? And I think that has been the most mind-boggling part that I'm still learning. How can I accept people where they're at and have the empathy to understand their perspectives, but meet them, and how do we compromise to go towards the same goal? And I think that has been something that, again, I've really am trying and I'm continuing to seeking to understand more about how do we, as these 4 generations, work together and understand each other better.
And Kim, it would be fair to say that there are no solutions to this problem, right? There's only understanding at a deeper level what the challenges are of having, a culture with multiple generations in it. Is that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And I think of myself being an instructional coach. My job is to coach most people that are in a different generation than I. So I have to change the way I approach coaching.
Yeah.
Because they may not accept or understand my points of view or how I think teaching should be approached. So me learning is like my professional development. I need to make sure it's to their interests. I might have to do a video rather than talk to you. So I need to also change so that I can continue to support the people that I need to support in the way that they need it most.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Kim. Yesterday I actually retired from my fourth career, which was retail sales for Apple here in Honolulu. And after 9.5 years, it was kind of an amazing moment to step out of the store for the last time. And I really had your meta question on my mind because for those 9 years, Kim, I have watched leadership at the store struggle to deal with 4 generations of employees. And oh boy, it's not easy. And I could see how much of a challenge it was to them. And oftentimes we think in terms of solutions. There has to be a solution to everything. And sometimes there isn't. There's just more understanding. So I really appreciated your question. It's had me thinking for a couple of weeks now about all sorts of things. So Catherine, you have 2 big meta questions on your mind, which I'm going to tie together. You are thinking deeply about competency-based educator pathways and about the disruptions to education that come from educators who have to relocate. So from your perch, where are we in this country with regard to the way educators and education leaders come into their positions? And have we made progress, Catherine? Do you see any trends that could give us hope? Are there pipelines to education you find exciting? What are your meta thoughts about this?
I have the honor to be able to work with educators from across the country.
Yeah.
And one of the struggles is, will this program meet this certification requirement? And what happens if I start here and move over there? Will it meet the certification requirement in a different state? And it's a barrier. It's a real barrier for educators, right? Because good teaching is good teaching is good teaching.
Yep.
Are there specific skills and strategies and contextual knowledge that educators need within a given, geographical region or community? Absolutely. But at the core of teaching is a set of essential skills and dispositions that all educators need. And right now, it's really hard for educators to simply have a straightforward, easy path through attaining those skills and then demonstrating that they have them in a way that's consistent and portable, right? Taking it with you from one state to another. So, it's as simple as a driver's license. We've defined what it is to be an effective driver. And if you pass the assessment in one test, that goes in your wallet and it goes with you across state lines. And teaching licenses are not like that. And so should it be as simple as a driver's license? Probably not. But is there room to make it a little bit simpler than what it is?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think if we're going to encourage more people to enter the field, having a universal or more uniform definition of what does it take to be an effective educator and having that pathway defined in a way that's more streamlined and more cohesive will just sort of help facilitate people going through that process a little bit more easily.
You know what I love, Catherine, is that there are 2 very different questions. One of them is, what does it mean to be a good teacher? And the other is, what does it mean to be an effective educator? And I feel like we've been held back for a long time because we keep focusing on what is a good teacher as if somehow it is a driver's license and everybody thinks that it's sort of the same criteria. But the effective educator is such a nuanced question, right? And that's what we're working towards. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
It is. And I think that as my hope would be is that as more states and districts and people in positional leadership, roles can come together to have these conversations, that we can really focus on being an effective educator.
Yeah.
And what does that look, sound, and feel like? And what's the evidence that we would use to define that? And my hope would be is that we are starting with students instead of the educators, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the outcomes that we have in classrooms and in schools.
That's awesome. Okay, so Kim, as you listen to Catherine today, what resonates? What jumps out at you over the course of the last hour in terms of some of the things that she talked about?
I think what resonates with me most is our commonality of wanting to transform education and being a part of the same program, that the program is literally modeling what competency-based learning looks like, feels like, and that, it is, like she said, super messy. And I'm glad that even though we didn't speak to each other on it, we said the same word. So I really feel like that resonates with me, is like, education is not going to be a linear process and straightforward. It's going to be pathways that we deviate from and go back to and continue to just kind of go on that windy journey, but we're going to get there. It's just, we're going to get there at a different time and a different pace. And that's okay. And to be okay with that.
That's awesome. Catherine, same question. What resonates with you about what Kim has talked about today?
It is something that resonated, but I think it's more of gratitude, appreciation, and an affirmation that I just really want to say thank you to Kim. Leaving the classroom after almost 20 years was a really hard decision for me. I entered education because I wanted to have impact on students. It's really hard to do that if you leave a school, right?
Yeah.
And so, coming to Two Revolutions, I saw the opportunity to have an impact in a different way. And that meant by being able to work with Two Revolutions to continue their process of refining, revising, and constantly improving the programs and the coursework that they offer to better meet the needs of educators. And that has been my work for the past couple of years. So to sit here and to be able to listen to Kim be vulnerable, be honest, and share that as a result of her experiences with us, that she is comfortable with being uncomfortable, one of my favorite phrases, Kim, and that she's talking about her learners and the impact that her learning has had on those students. She's a different educator. And so leaving the classroom, I'm not directly having impact on my students, but in a way, we are indirectly having impact on classrooms across the country by working with this program. And so, Kim, just a thank you to you for your vulnerability and for your leadership. Your learning is not just impacting you, it is clearly impacting your school and your students and your fellow educators. Being able to adapt to meet their needs in ways that they need it the most. What a powerful sentence. And just gratitude for who you are as an educational leader.
Thank you.
That's awesome, Catherine. I will share my gratitude, Catherine, for you making the choice of Kim to be your companion on this interview and for this episode today, because without that choice, I wouldn't have known Kim. And it has been an incredibly joyous process for me over the last 2 weeks to dive into all the material that Kim provided for me. She gave me, her papers that she's written, her reflections, her slide decks. I went through everything. And it really, my gratitude is around the idea that it took me deeply back into the process of learning, which I don't think that I would have experienced without you choosing Kim today. So I'm just appreciative of the way that we went about setting up this particular episode and you choosing Kim as the person that would be on the call today. And Kim, you rock. It's amazing what you're doing. And that's kind of a perfect segue into this final question here for the both of you. You both know I love to end episodes by providing guests with the opportunity to shout out to a giant upon whose shoulders they stand. So, Catherine, I'm going to have you go first. I'm going to have you share the story of a principal who not only became a mentor, but also a barrier remover, which I call a sponsor. Who was this principal, and in what ways do you carry him with you each day as you work at Two Revolutions and impact the lives of these teachers who are extending their learning way beyond what they would normally do?
I was fortunate enough to be working in a small school with a community mandate to push towards a competency-based model. And it was before there were any, or at least a lot of books on competency-based education, and there certainly wasn't a how-to manual. And so we sort of got to engineer our school, right? And part of that is running headfirst into barriers.
Yeah.
And being able to go to him and to say, you know, what if we could do this? How might we be able to do this? My group of students who, by the way, were freshmen, were 14, 15 years old, and I came up with this amazing idea, and we would like to, but these are the things that are preventing us. And knowing that I could walk into that office and be met by someone who said, it is a barrier and let's figure it out together. You know, that was powerful. It really fostered that idea of, you know, innovation and iteration and being able to just do what's right for kids. So it created an approach for the design team to really be forward thinking, and it allowed us to respond to the needs of our kids. You know, there were also times where we were going to try something new and we weren't sure if it was going to be perfect. In fact, we were pretty confident it wouldn't be. And he would say to me, anything you do today that is working towards this model, which is student-centered, is going to be better than what we were doing yesterday. Even if it's a mess, it's still better. And so try it, learn from it. We'll be better the next day together. And that model of leadership and co-ownership I took with me as a leader myself, but also just, you know, instilling that mindset and that strategy within my own students in how they approach their learning. So it was someone else who modeled it for me, lived it, breathed it, passed it on. And now it shows up in a lot of the work that I do and that I continue to get to do with my work with Two Revolutions.
Wow, that's marvelous. Beautiful. So, Kim, you provided me with a list of giants, including your late husband, Clay, and your dad, Francis Miyahira. I would love for you to focus on two school leaders you listed, Wade Araki and Mary Wenstrom. In what ways have you learned what leadership could be from these two giants in your life?
Yeah, Wade Araki, man, a few words, but
Yes.
man, he can move schools. I'll tell you that much.
Yes.
He was my principal when I was at Benjamin Parker Elementary School. And being that it was a school that was a high free and reduced lunch, you know, a low SES school, but he wanted to provide opportunities for those students that people at a private school had. He was innovative. He got one-to-one laptops for students at our school back in 2008, and he wanted me to pilot it and have the students learn how to use it and take it home and provide internet at school. And we found creative ways for them to get free internet to go to Windward Mall to get internet to do their work on it. So, you know, his innovation of wanting kids to have, I should say all kids to have the same type of education and not let money be the cause of not having, of the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah.
And then again, just about relationships. I mean, that man, you know, he seems very stoic, but man, he cares about his staff. He cares about his kids. And, you know, just by his leadership of showing empathy and caring for his staff. And he always told us, you know, family comes first. And like I said, he really didn't say much with words, but he led by his actions. And, when I was going through my most crisis time when my husband unexpectedly passed, he was there at the hospital with me. He was there, telling me, take all the time you need. And even till as recent as a month to 2 months ago, when I had some advice that I needed help with, he was there for me and my family. So he is just a man that I feel like probably doesn't get as much accolades as he deserves. But being that he's trying to move schools in a traditional public schools, but trying to do what charter schools and other private schools are trying to educate their kids, I think is something that I admire most about him, because he wants to be innovative. For Mary, I got to know her at my former school that I was at, and she's really got me out of my comfort zone. I've worked with her with Polina Education, and working at my other school, I saw things from a different lens of being from K to 12 and not just seeing elementary. So I've seen children grow through the K to 12 spectrum, and being able to see a larger perspective on education and how work-based learning and having kids actually work with real life people that work in industries and pairing what that experience could look like and helping solve problems with them. I think that is part of that competency-based approach, and that where education, I think, should go throughout high school is that giving kids these opportunities of not just the normal classes that they're given of biology, but they should be given opportunities of careers we've never heard of and work side by side. And, not always a traditional teacher that has an education degree always has to be the educator of something else. And I think she's really widened my ability to see schools differently than I would have seen it if I just kind of stayed in my just elementary lens. So just giving me that wide perspective of what could schools look like in the future, and what do we need to do to prepare these kids, and what skills and dispositions that are required of them, I think helped me better be a teacher leader, and knowing at an elementary level, how can we start building that process so that kids do have voice and choice and can see different pathways of what schools could be, what their careers could be. And again, just making sure that education doesn't stay the same. My one quote is, you can crawl, you can walk, you can run, but you just can't stand still. You got to keep moving.
Wow. That's a great way to close this episode, Kim. And so what we'll do is we'll dedicate this episode to all of the giants upon whose shoulders you both stand. That's fantastic. Catherine Thorn, Kim Asun, thank you so much for providing me with so much wonderful material to work with, to prepare for today. It was just a wonderful process to go through and dive into your lives and your work. Really appreciate the time, and I can't wait to get this episode out to all of our listeners. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Kim.
Our editor, creative consultant, and sound engineer is the talented Evan Kurohara. Our theme music is created by a remarkable pianist, Michael Sloan. Producer of 12 albums with over 100 songs, Michael Sloan is featured in Apple Music, Spotify, and all major music platforms. You can also find his work on his YouTube channel. Michael has listeners in over 100 countries and 2,000 cities. We'd be grateful if you would support these episodes with leading edge, innovative and imaginative educators and students by giving us your own rating and writing a review wherever you get your podcasts. This series is sponsored by Education Change Agent, Ted Dintersmith, executive producer of the award-winning documentary film, Most Likely to Succeed, and author of the best-selling book, What School Could Be. If you are committed to rolling up your sleeves and joining thousands of educators, business professionals, nonprofit leaders, and parents as we reimagine education to be relevant and learner-centered, please join the What School Could Be global online community. Simply log in to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org or download the What School Could Be app from your favorite app store. The What School Could Be podcast is brought to you by Josh Rapoon Productions. Send your feedback to josh@whatschoolcouldbe.org. Follow the show on Twitter @WSCB Podcast and on LinkedIn @Josh Rapoon. Listeners, one of the most important things we all can do is to bring kindness and compassion into the world. For sure, we need a surplus of both right now. Until next time, ahui ho, and thank you for listening to the What School Could Be podcast.